I think there is a chance. It's probably fairly slim, but there is a chance, which is why I'm going out there.
It's particularly tragic when we don't know exactly what's happened and question marks still remain.
We're devastated by the disappearance of our beloved Gus.
Nearly 90 hours since he was last seen.
It's day 5 and a crucial clue has been found in the search for 4-year-old Gus.
Gus is a little 4-year-old, blonde, curly hair, smiling face. On Tuesday night, senior police spoke to Gus's family and prepared them for the possibility that we may not be able to find him alive. And this is based on scientific advice, professional advice that we get about how long it would be possible for a 4-year-old to survive in that terrain with the weather conditions and the clothing that he was wearing at the time. Whilst we've all been hoping for a miracle, that miracle was not eventuated. And in the last 48 hours, despite the professional advice, it being unlikely that Gus would have survived, we're confident that we've done absolutely everything we can to locate Gus within the search area. But despite our best efforts, we have not been able to locate him. And unfortunately, we are now having to scale back this search for Gus. We won't stop. We will continue to investigate and follow any lines of inquiry that we currently have.
Before you scroll, if you want first-hand updates on this story and others, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now so you don't miss what comes next. On the late afternoon of September 27, 2025, 4-year-old Augustus, Gus, Lamont was playing close to the family homestead at Oak Park Station. The detail is simple and terrible. A child at play, a familiar place, a moment that would soon fracture into a long and painful mystery. Family accounts say he was near a sandpit by the homestead when he was last observed around 5 p.m. By 5:30 p.m., he did not return when called. What follows from that small span of time is the hard work of investigators, volunteers, and a community trying to reconstruct an ordinary afternoon that, in the space of minutes, became extraordinary and unresolved. When a young child vanishes close to home, the first hours are crucial. In rural and remote settings, those minutes are magnified by the environment: open plains, shifting light, and long distances to neighbors or formal emergency services. In this case, the family report that they searched privately before contacting police, and the timing of that contact, and what precisely the family searched in those early hours, became an essential line of inquiry for detectives. Reconstructing those initial movements is not about blame. It is the factual backbone that helps investigators determine which areas to prioritize, what evidence might still exist, and how natural forces such as wind and heat may have altered or destroyed fragile traces. For families in remote communities, an instinctive, immediate search is often a reflex. Check the yards, the buildings, the usual hiding places. It's a human reaction born of hope and familiarity. Investigators recognize that impulse, but they also need a precise chronology. Questions that might seem small in the moment, which gate was open, which vehicle left, what time did the sun set, are the same questions that form the scaffolding of a methodical search. With a young child, the variables expand quickly: exposure to heat, the presence of water troughs or dams, animal activity, and the direction of any foot impressions. All of these elements revolve, in this case, around that last certain moment: a child playing near the homestead on the afternoon of September 27th. The response to Gus's disappearance was large, coordinated, and multi-pronged, the kind of operation remote communities call for when every minute counts and the landscape is vast. Police, the Australian Defence Force, State Emergency Service volunteers, specialist Aboriginal trackers, helicopter crews, drone teams, and hundreds of local volunteers all took part in the search. Each asset brought different strengths. Military teams provided endurance and logistics for sustained foot searches and wide grid sweeps. Helicopters and drones offered aerial perspectives that could identify gullies, fence lines, and waterholes. Aboriginal trackers read microdisturbances in the soil and vegetation that machines cannot see, and volunteers provided the manpower to walk grid lines, door knock local properties, and sustain long hours in the field. Managing such a mixed response in a remote environment is a logistical puzzle. Fuel, spare parts, radio coverage, rest rotations for teams, and careful scheduling of aerial windows are all necessary to keep operations effective and to avoid inadvertently obliterating delicate evidence. The use of thermal and infrared equipment can help at night, but heat, dust, and battery life restrict their utility. On the ground, searchers adopt disciplined patterns, grid lines, lane searches, and sector sweeps to ensure the property is covered without duplication or gaps. A coordinated command structure is essential so that every footprint, item, or sighting is logged, geo-referenced, and cataloged. This allows investigators to revisit leads and to ensure that nothing is accidentally erased by subsequent movement. That the state mobilized these resources speaks to the seriousness with which the disappearance was treated and to the recognition that in remote landscapes, a broad range of skills is needed to even hope of recovering a small child. The scale of the effort also underscores the desperation that drives every person involved. Volunteers walking until their feet ache, pilots flying low into wind, trackers kneeling to examine a faint scuff. All of it was aimed at one objective: to find the smallest, most ordinary sign that might explain how Gus's ordinary afternoon became a long and painful mystery. One of the most unnerving facts in this case is how little the ground returned. After exhaustive sweeps, teams reported an absence of the sorts of physical traces searchers expect. No hat, no toy, no shoe, no clear trail of consecutive footprints leading away from the homestead. That silence from the landscape is unusual and, for many searchers, deeply puzzling. Experienced trackers and volunteers in Australia's outback expect to find something: a dropped item, a scuff, an animal disturbance, but in this case, the ground consistently offered inconclusive or ambiguous impressions. There are reasons why terrain can be uncooperative. Wind lifts and shifts fine dust, heat alters ground temperature to mask thermal signatures, nocturnal animals can move through and scatter small objects overnight, and repeated searches by people and vehicles can erase or obfuscate initial impressions. In addition, a 3-hour window between first suspicion and formal police notification meant that family members had already covered parts of the property, which complicates the assessment of which traces are pre-existing and which are relevant. Investigators and forensic teams therefore had to tread carefully, document and photograph everything, resist assumptions, and test plausible impressions against objective standards. What the early searches showed, tragically, was not a clear trail to follow but an environment that had been largely scrubbed of decisive clues. Among the rare pieces of early evidence was a small impression in the ground roughly 500 meters from the homestead, a print that briefly raised hope among volunteers and local searchers. Initially, some thought it might point to a short walk away from the house, but forensic review later judged the impression inconclusive. In outdoor investigations, a single print can be powerful if it is part of a sequence. Isolated, ambiguous impressions are far harder to interpret. A print might be a degraded boot mark, a tire tread, an animal track, or a wind-sculpted hollow that for a moment looks human. The careful forensic reaction was necessary. When potential traces are not collected and documented under controlled conditions, they risk contamination and misclassification. That doesn't mean initial findings are worthless. They are cataloged and tested, photographed from multiple angles, cast where possible, and compared to known footwear samples. But the eventual conclusion that this particular boot print could not be confirmed as belonging to Gus underlines both the limits of outdoor forensics and the heartbreak of a family windowing hope around small signs that do not hold up to stringent review. It also shows why investigators move from immediate search modes to methodical investigative techniques. Ambiguous physical clues demand a slower, forensic approach rather than a rapid tactical response. Search operations in remote cases often move in phases: an initial surge, a period of consolidation, and, where justified, targeted returns to key areas. In this case, after an initial intensive sweep, efforts were scaled back and then later resumed with renewed focus. The decision to return to Oak Park Station with a concentrated grid, a roughly 5.5-kilometer radius covering tens of square kilometers by foot, was driven by a combination of continued uncertainty, new expert advice, and the understanding that repeated sweeps sometimes reveal what first passes miss. Returning is not an admission of failure, it is standard investigative practice. Early searches are often broad and driven by the urgency of rescue. Later passes are more measured, using different techniques and the benefit of accumulated information. Flight logs, vehicle movements, witness recollections examined with the fresh perspective of time. The renewed search mobilized significant resources again, dozens of defense personnel, police teams, drone sorties, and dedicated foot patrols, all coordinated to re-examine areas with refined hypotheses. Investigators also used the downtime between phases to review data, cross-check tips, and plan how to protect potential evidence during the next sweep. Sadly, even the return search concluded without a decisive breakthrough. But the deliberate strategy, step back, reanalyze, then reapply resources, is how complex, ambiguous cases are tackled. It keeps options open, ensures methodical evidence handling, and respects the need to be both thorough and careful in ways that frantic initial moves cannot always allow. Throughout public briefings, police have emphasized that, at present, there is no publicly disclosed evidence that confirms foul play. That phrasing matters. It does not equate to an assertion that foul play did not occur, but rather to a factual statement about the current state of evidence available to the public. Investigators must balance transparency with the integrity of the inquiry. They cannot confirm theories without corroborating proof, nor can they release sensitive details that may compromise their ability to follow leads. Saying there is no evidence of foul play in public releases aims to prevent premature conclusions and to avoid fueling baseless speculation. At the same time, investigators continue to treat the disappearance with full seriousness. A dedicated task force was established to sift through interviews, dashcam footage, metadata from devices, and every credible tip. That investigative posture means checking alibis, tracking vehicle movements near the property, and integrating civilian and technical data into a timeline. The public can therefore understand the cautious language as the responsible stance of detectives who need evidence to support any public allegation or legal step. The creation of a task force represents a shift into an investigative phase intended to leave no plausible line of inquiry unexplored. Its mandate includes re-interviewing witnesses, collating technical data such as phone metadata and dashcam clips from vehicles that may have been in the area, and reviewing all footprints, photographs, and drone footage gathered during the ground searches. Digital forensics, timestamps, device locations, and video frames can provide the precise, verifiable detail that outdoor traces sometimes cannot. Investigators work to cross-reference human recollections with technological records to build a mosaic that either supports or refutes possible scenarios. Task force investigators also need to manage the inflow of public tips. A missing person case can generate a flood of information, and not all of it is credible. Filtering that data requires methodical triage, prioritize time-stamped, corroborated evidence, validate witness accounts and device data, trace the origin of social media posts. It's painstaking, slow work that often occurs unseen by the public, but it is the only way to convert noise into actionable leads. The task force's continuing work is therefore both investigative and curatorial. Assemble a coherent evidentiary picture that can stand up to scrutiny and guide next steps. An unmistakable modern reality of high-profile cases is how quickly misinformation can spread. Within days of Gus's disappearance, altered images, unverified claims, and AI-generated content circulated on social platforms. Every false claim is more than just noise. It diverts police time to debunking, fills tip lines with dead ends, and can inflict real harm on a grieving family. Police repeatedly urge the public to rely on official channels and to forward credible, verifiable information rather than reposting speculative material. Misinformation also changes public perception, creating confusion about what is known and what remains unverified. In an environment already fraught with anxiety, distinguishing credible evidence from fabrication becomes a vital public service. Communities can help by sharing only confirmed updates and by directing potential leads straight to investigators rather than amplifying uncertain content. That restraint both protects the integrity of the investigation and shields the family from needless distress caused by false narratives. Throughout the investigation, the Lamont family publicly requested privacy while also cooperating fully with police. That balance, a family's need to grieve and the public's demand for answers, is delicate and painful. Media attention, online speculation, and community concern create a pressure that families in the spotlight rarely asked for but must endure. At the same time, the community rallied. Vigils at the homestead, messages of support, and local volunteers joining searches underscored the deep emotional weight of this case. The human story, a small child, a family, a community, remains at the center of every fact and every lead. Investigators and community leaders have repeatedly asked for compassion in public conversations. Focus on verified information, respect the family's space, and channel energy into helpful actions, such as providing verified tips to police, rather than fueling rumor. The emotional impact of a prolonged, unresolved disappearance is profound. It changes the rhythm of a small community, presses on the hearts of volunteers, and leaves families waiting for answers that may take months or years to find. This disappearance is a test of endurance for detectives, volunteers, and a grieving family. The remote landscape makes timely, methodical searches essential and technically difficult. Small clues, a footprint, a scrap of fabric, need rigorous, transparent forensic handling. Digital and time-stamped evidence is especially valuable in a setting where the natural environment can erase traces almost instantly. Misinformation online harms the investigation and deepens a family's distress. Careful, verified tips are far more useful than speculation. Task Force Horizon remains active, and investigators continue to review all credible leads. The case remains open. If you have information that is verifiable, dashcam footage, time-stamped photos, or any concrete evidence placing someone or something near Oak Park Station on or around September 27th, the right step is to pass it directly to the police. They are the only channel that can properly triage, validate, and act on credible information. Keep Gus's name alive with facts, not rumors. Keep pressure on the process with patience and verified details. And most of all, keep compassion for the family at the center of every conversation.